Diseases come in many shapes, sizes, and forms. They can be small, such as the common cold or the flu, or they could be devastating, such as cancer or Alzheimer's disease. While diseases all have the same premise, which is a disorder of structure or function in a human, animal, or plant, especially one that has a known cause and a distinctive group of symptoms, signs, or anatomical changes, they're like snowflakes, in a sense that no two are exactly alike. They may be very similar, such as different types of cancers, but they'll always have at least one difference. However, there's also a spectrum. While some diseases can be easily cured with the right treatment, others can be incurable and even have devastating consequences with symptoms that appear like something out of a horror movie. And so today, I'll be looking at just a few of the deadliest and scariest diseases in the world because morbid curiosity killed the cat. Hello, kings, queens, and everything in between. I'm Lizzie. If you're new, welcome. If you're not new, welcome back. I cover everything from the goofy and silly to the dark and disturbing. So without further ado, let's begin. Also, once again, these are in no particular order and can either be from the present or past in history. 1. Rabies. We're starting off strong with this one, which is the rabies virus, which is one that's most commonly mentioned but still deserves a place in this video. While the first reported case of human rabies in the US was recorded in 1985 by a pathologist in Abilene, Texas, the actual disease itself has been around much longer, since 23rd century BC, where according to Stanford University, the pre-Mosaic Asthuna code of Mesopotamia stated the following. Probably pronounced that wrong, so I am very sorry. If a dog is mad and the authorities have brought the fact to the knowledge of its owner, if he does not keep it in and it bites a man and causes his death, then the owner shall pay 2/3 of a mina of silver. In 1804, George Gottfried Zink proved that rabies is transmitted from saliva by injecting animals with saliva from a rabid dog, which in turn helped prove that animal bites transmit the disease. The first effective rabies vaccine was created by Louis Pasteur, and it was used to help treat a human bite victim in 1885. According to the CDC, contact with infected bats is the leading cause of rabies cases, although any contact with wildlife still poses a risk. Which, didn't bats also start the whole COVID pandemic? Can we just stop touching the bats, please, for the love of all that is holy? Now, it's known that animals transmit this virus to each other and to humans, so therefore symptoms present in both the animal and the human. So I'll list a few of the symptoms from each. Starting with the animals, here are a few symptoms according to the American Veterinary Medical Association. Fearfulness, aggressive behavior, excessive drooling, difficulty swallowing, staggering, paralysis, and seizures. However, that's not every symptom they could experience. For example, a nocturnal animal that's out in the daytime and wandering in the open is definitely a red flag that could possibly mean the animal is infected. It's also important to note that not every animal with the disease is rabid or aggressive. In fact, some are exactly the opposite, with them being uncharacteristically affectionate when they normally wouldn't be. Some may also experience depression, self-mutilation, or extreme sensitivity to light and overall unusual behavior, such as nocturnal animals being out in the daytime, like I mentioned earlier. Now, on to the humans. For rabies in humans, there's typically an incubation period where the virus doesn't show any symptoms and you appear completely fine, which typically lasts between 20 and 90 days. However, due to several factors like how close it is to the brain or the age of the individual, or even how much of the virus has entered the body, it could last as little as maybe 4 days, and even incubation periods longer than 6 years have been reported. The first onset of symptoms could appear like a normal flu, such as weakness, fever, headache, or discomfort, and even itching and prickling at the site of the bite, which may last for several days. However, the more severe symptoms typically appear within 2 weeks, where the virus causes disruptions in the brain. This could include the following: anxiety, insomnia, confusion, agitation, delirium, hallucinations, hydrophobia, which is a fear of water, typically appearing because of how painful it is to swallow, hypersalivation, meaning excessive drooling, and also seizures like in animals. It's also important to note that once signs of rabies appear, it's nearly always fatal, and only 20 cases have been reported of people surviving the virus with those symptoms, and only a few survivors had no history of receiving the rabies vaccine. Therefore, since it has such a low survival rate, treatment at that point is basically used to make the individual comfortable in their final days. If you're ever bitten or had contact with a wild animal, or even suspect an animal could possibly have the virus, and you've been in contact, please get medical attention so you don't become another fatality. It is preventable until it's too late. 2. Bubonic plague or the Black Death disease. Most likely the earliest recorded pandemic, this disease originated in parts of Europe, such as Central Asia, Crimea, and westernmost parts of Europe, and Middle East and North Africa regions, as those are the places where the disease traveled along the Silk Road, which was a network of trade routes. Fun fact, when I looked up Silk Road to make sure I had the information right, I got the Silk Road Dark Web Black Market from 2011 where people could buy and sell illegal products, so that's always a fun time. Anyways, it's a disease that was thought to have originated over 2,000 years ago, although research has shown that it may have existed in Europe as early as 3000 BC, and again, most likely spread by trading ships. This disease was so contagious that reportedly even contact with somebody else's clothes could spread the disease further. It was also so deadly that people who were perfectly healthy when they went to bed could be dead from the disease by morning. Yersinia pestis, the true name of the virus, was known to travel through the air as well as through infected fleas and rats, as rats were also found everywhere in the medieval period of Europe, and where there are rats, there are also fleas. And they were aboard several ships, which is why it's believed to have been spread through the ships they used. We now know all of this information about this horrible illness, but back then, they didn't have as many resources and had no idea how it transmitted or what was going on. Doctors used to try and treat the disease by bloodletting and boil lancing, which bloodletting is removing blood from a patient's body, a lot of the time by leeches, which was used until the 19th century, and boil lancing is cutting open a boil to basically drain the pus from it. But they weren't exactly sanitary then, so you could imagine how unhygienic it was. Many individuals also believed it was some sort of punishment by God. Today, while far less common, the disease still exists in mostly areas of the world that have a lot of rodents. About 7 cases in the US occur every year. Now, let's look at some symptoms and then how it's prevented. In the bubonic plague, symptoms may present as the following: fever, headache, chills, weakness, pain in the abdomen, arms, and legs, 1 or more swollen, painful lymph nodes that can also leak pus, and coughing up blood can also appear, while some other symptoms such as nausea and vomiting may also be present. The incubation period is typically 2 to 8 days, and the bacteria multiplies in the lymph nodes. If left untreated, the bacteria can spread to other parts of the body and become fatal. However, now it can be cured with antibiotics, and if treated, the likelihood of survival is relatively high, and it's no longer cured with whatever the fuck they were doing with leeches. It can also be prevented with flea control, rodent control, insect repellent, using gloves when handling deceased or sick animals, and just don't touch random ass animals you find in the wild. I cannot stress this enough. 3. Mad cow disease. Mad cow disease, also known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy, definitely pronounced those first two wrong, is a brain disease that's first major outbreak emerged in the 1980s to the 1990s, with cases reported in at least 24 countries, although most resided in the United Kingdom. BSE is reportedly caused by a prion, which is an infectious protein that is normally found in the bodies of animals and people. Even after being infected, it can take years for symptoms to first emerge. Scientists believe that BSE may have been caused by feeding cattle meat and bone meal that contain the prion-infected products from cows or sheep. And the virus spread throughout the UK when the feed was given to young calves. The first known cases of the cows with this disease were most likely infected in the 70s, even though the symptoms first began in 1986. In 1993, 1,000 more cases grew every week, and now they still occur, although it's extremely rare. Cases were also reported in Ireland, Portugal, and Switzerland, and Canada. In the US, only 6 cases have been reported. After feed bans were put in place by animal health officials, which banned feeding livestock the specific feed that contained the prion, cases drastically reduced. But originally, they attempted to solve the problem by killing the animal so it didn't spread. Humans get this disease by eating the meat from the infected cattle. In the cattle, it's a progressive neurological disease that damages the nervous system and overall brain. Common signs include incoordination or trouble walking and standing up, and the cow may act very nervous or violent, which is why it has been named mad cow disease. In humans, early symptoms can include the following: insomnia, depression, anxiety, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, and later symptoms may include dementia, movement disorders, blindness, coma, and of course, death, which is typically 1 to 2 years after symptoms emerge. There is no cure for this disease, and treatment is more focused on managing symptoms and keeping the individual comfortable. Next on our list, we have the infamous HIV/AIDS. HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus, is a progressive disease that eventually goes from being just a virus to being AIDS itself, or autoimmune deficiency syndrome, which is a disease and virus transmitted through bodily fluids such as blood or during extra intimate activities, if you get what I'm saying, and lowers the body's white blood cell count, making it extremely difficult to fight off infection. It is an STD, or sexually transmitted disease, but that doesn't always mean you have to have sex to get it. For example, another way is through sharing needles with a person who is infected. In 1981, the CDC recorded 5 cases of men getting something called pneumocystis pneumonia, which is a lung infection that occurs in weakened immune systems, which is what the HIV virus is known to do. However, it's important to address that because the CDC and other news sources really only covered the cases in individuals who were gay, many believed that it could only be passed and transmitted between gay people, even calling it the quote-unquote gay disease as a way to be homophobic. The first case that was truly discovered was that of Robert Rayford, who was 16 and from St. Louis, Missouri, who died in 1969, but they were able to retrieve a blood sample later to determine that he had it. In the year 2000, the CDC had this data to share. 774,467 persons had been reported with AIDS in the United States. 448,060 of these had died. 3,542 persons had unknown vital status. The number of persons living with AIDS, 322,865, is the highest ever reported. Of these, 79% were men, 61% were Black or Hispanic, and 41% were infected through male-to-male sex. Of these AIDS cases, approximately 1/3 were reported during 1981 to 1992, 1993 to 1995, and 1996 to 2000. Now, according to the World Health Organization, at the end of 2023, it was estimated that 39.9 million people were living with the disease globally. When it was initially discovered, it was basically a death sentence. In 1981 to 1990, 100,777 deaths were caused by this disease, and most not even knowing they had it, as the incubation period before early symptoms show is 2 to 6 weeks. However, they often appear like a normal flu and go away on their own. For example, legendary rock star Freddie Mercury, lead singer and sometimes pianist for Queen, who eventually passed away from AIDS, was said to most likely have contracted the virus sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, seeking help for it as early as 1982 before officially being diagnosed in 1987 and passing away in 1991. HIV has 3 main stages. The first is acute HIV, which is the flu-like symptoms that usually go away quickly. 2 is the chronic stage, where you can have it for years and spread it without even feeling sick or knowing you're spreading it. Stage 3 is when it turns to AIDS, where your body can no longer fight off infection, making you extremely susceptible to other diseases besides just the AIDS, such as you're more likely to get certain cancers. Some symptoms may include enlarged lymph nodes for more than 3 months, lack of energy, weight loss, frequent fever and sweating, persistent rashes or flaky skin, pelvic inflammatory disease that doesn't respond to treatment, short-term memory loss, or 1 or more infections related to a weakened immune system, one of the most common ones being pneumonia. I must also say that most individuals don't die from the disease itself, but die from the diseases that enter the body while they have the virus. While there is no cure, there are treatments, the most effective being antiretroviral medications that control how much of the virus is in the body. This can help you live longer and stay healthy. However, putting off treatment can make the virus multiply and attack, eventually leading to death. This virus is preventable with testing done if you're sexually active and wearing protection, and obviously don't share needles because that's gross and also a way to spread diseases like HIV and AIDS. 5. Tuberculosis. Last on this list of some of the scariest diseases in the world, we have tuberculosis. Caused by the Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria, according to the World Health Organization, tuberculosis is defined as the following. Tuberculosis, TB, is an infectious disease caused by the bacteria that most often affects the lungs. It spreads through the air when people with TB cough, sneeze, or spit. Much like HIV, this infection first begins just with the bacteria known as TB infection, where you have the virus in you but your immune system is still fighting it off. TB disease, or active TB, is when you're experiencing symptoms and when it becomes contagious. The earliest recordings of this were in India over 3,000 years ago and in China over 2,000 years ago. During the 1600s and 1800s, 25% of people died in Europe from the disease. In the 1800s, some even believed that the first in a family to be infected and die would come back as a vampire to spread it to them too. These were dubbed vampire panics. In the Middle Ages, people would line up in large lines in front of the king or queen because it was believed that their touch would cure them of this disease. In the 1800s, exposure to sunshine and drier climates were believed to cure the illness. In hospitals, the patients were given some healthy food, rest, and fresh air, while doctors tried to find a cure for it, which led to antibiotics eventually being created in the mid-20th century, and now the disease is curable and rarely do deaths occur from it. Now to the symptoms of specifically active TB. An extreme cough that lasts 3 weeks or longer, chest pain, coughing up phlegm or blood from inside the lungs, weakness or fatigue, loss of appetite, weight loss, chills, fever, or sweating at night. but the symptoms depend on the person and the area in which the body is infected. If you believe you may have contracted it, seek medical help because it's very much curable with the right treatment. So that's going to be it for this video, everyone. I was going to add way more, but then this video would be 1,000,000 years long. So if you want to see a part 2, please make sure to comment down below. And if you have any suggestions for more content I should do, I am always looking for ideas, so please do let me know. I also talk about useless shit no one cares about, so if you also care about useless shit that no one cares about, consider subscribing if you'd like. I love you all, stay safe, and never let anybody take your crown.